Chapter 91 Awaken. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. In the Royal Palace Hotel, Antanria was still waiting for Apophis to wake up. After a long stretch of studying, she took a break to watch TV. The latest news caught her eye and was very troubling. Chancellor Soli had declared war on the Orc Empire. The horrors Antanria had witnessed on Era made her deeply hate all violence, even though she believed it was important to be strong enough to protect one's self, so Antanria was severely troubled by this turn of events. War, she whispered, again and again. How can such civilizations keep acting so uncivilized? Oh, my beloved Elantari, why do you let the universe burn? But Antanria couldn't let herself be distracted. She had to not only study, but also to strengthen her inner energy. This would eventually allow her to unlock a fighting specialty, what the Eternals called a class. Thankfully, some of the Zetarch books which Apophis had in his possession taught Antanria how to train properly. While Apophis was gone, Antanria trained hard to master her inner energy. After a few hours of strenuous concentration, an aura shone around Antanria. Her energy glowed, increasing in brightness until it lit up the whole room. The Zetarch princess had just ascended to rank D. That is, she had become an ascensionist. Paris. Meanwhile, Alexander had just finished instructing his new butler, Diana, in her daily duties in the new apartment. Now that those basic details were settled, it was time for Alexander to return to his mother and tell her how he intended to respond to her illness. He arrived home, or at his parents' apartment, since he technically had his own now, though he hoped they would also move in, just before dinner time. Alexander's parents were surprised to see him again so soon. After the horrific news about the cancer, they'd expected their son to bury his grief by going on a wild spending spree. They were somewhat right, though they didn't know it. Upon entering the apartment, Alexander sat at the dinner table, took his mother's hands, and said, "Mom, I may have found a way to save you. I just need a little time. Please, start the cancer treatments the doctors offered. I'll pay for every credit. This will give me the time to ensure the solution will work for you. Every moment you fight this disease is valuable. Please, don't give up. Don't abandon me." His mother's instinct was to refuse. The doctors had warned her that the only useful cancer treatment for her stage would be painful and degrading. Moreover, the cost was just too much. It would be a complete waste of money, and every credit spent on her was a credit that could have made the rest of her family's life better after she passed away. Wouldn't it be better to enjoy her final days to the fullest instead of dragging out a miserable treatment that would debilitate her and drain her son's bank account? But just as she opened her mouth to refuse, she looked into her son's eyes and saw a flame of hope there that she couldn't bear to extinguish. In the end, her love for Alexander was greater than her desire for her own happiness. "I trust you, my son." Alexander's eyes welled with tears as he leaped to his feet and hugged his mother tightly. He didn't like showing these emotions, but the moment had overwhelmed him. "Thank you," he whispered. Once the meal was over, Alexander transferred 1,000,000 credits to his parents' bank account to relieve them of all financial worries, and also announced that he was moving to Sector 16. Then he called Diana, telling her he'd be away while he visited the notary's office to finalize the documents for his new apartment. "Once you're done with your chores," he said, "meet up with me in the game." Alexander didn't know how long he'd end up playing this time, but it would definitely be his longest gaming session since his reincarnation. He wouldn't disconnect until he found his mother's cure. He clenched his left fist with determination, then entered the game. Chapter 92 It begins. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Author's note: in Horus, space battles are fought by fleets of warships, also often referred to as armies. A fleet is made up of a number of balanced units, called corps, which are generally equivalent in strength and role to one another. Each corps is made up of several ships of different types. They are usually intended to be balanced, general-purpose combat units, though there are specialized corps for specific tasks. Larger fleets contain greater numbers of corps, but are careful to make sure their corps are balanced with one another within the fleet. During the upcoming battle, a standard corps is made up of 100 ships of varying types. For space battles, the starting positions of a participant's fleet can be roughly described in two-dimensional terms, ignoring the up/down axis. Two opposing forces can be imagined as though they were ordinary armies facing one another on a battlefield. In this model, each army is made up of a left, right, and central flank, each of which is made up of multiple corps. Each corps is commanded by a high-ranking officer, admirals for Federation Corps and warlords for Orc Empire Corps. Each fleet is also controlled at the highest level by a commanding officer. Grand Admiral Azeroth commands the Federation forces in the upcoming battle, while Great Warlord Renier commands the Orc forces. Happy reading! Kronos I. The two Geoil children who had first witnessed the coming battle now sat with their parents on a hill outside their village. Night had just fallen. Above them, hanging in the darkness of the night sky, a breathtaking spectacle could be seen. Over 15,000 warships were stationed above their heads. Normally, at this altitude, one or two ships would be completely indistinguishable from the darkness. However, the size of the opposing fleets was so vast that it was now impossible to miss them. They seemed to form a single mass, so that the fleet which was supposed to be protecting Kronos I was indistinguishable from the fleet which was supposed to be the Geoil's enemy. Kronos I planetary orbit. The two huge fleets loomed in the upper reaches of the atmosphere, facing each other. All the major galactic media companies were spreading every detail of the new war like wildfire. Despite the probable millions of deaths which would result from this battle, it was pure gold for the media. In fact, a famous journalist was even covering the event live. Hello. This is Kent Brockman, and I'm in the Kronos system, near the planet Kronos I. The tension is quite strong as the two fleets stare each other down. Let's review the composition of the two fleets. The Federation fleet is commanded by Grand Admiral with Azeroth, of course, the rising star of the Federation, who is famously taking righteous vengeance against the savage Orc Empire for the genocide they perpetrated on Taio. The Federation fleet is composed of 5,100 warships. These make up 50.1 Army Corps and, by our estimate based on Federation records, about 1 million and 1.20.5 thousand astronauts. 19 of these corps come from the Federation's allies, the Lizardman Commonwealth and the Holy Elf Empire. However, impressive as those numbers might be, the opposing Orc fleet is even more terrifying. The Orcs have fielded 10,000 warships, crewed by 2 million and 3.50 thousand astronauts, commanded by Great Warlord Renier. It seems that, for the moment, neither side wants to risk making the first move, due to the diplomatic and political fallout which this action would provoke. This was Kent Brockman, live from the Kronos system. Stay calm and stay informed. Great Warlord Renier was confident, without even the barest hint of worry in his heart. His military experience stretched back for centuries, and there was surely no commander in the Federation who could outmatch him. Combined with his numerical superiority and the divine blessing of Khorne, there was no way Reiner could lose. In his flagship, Grand Admiral Azeroth stared at the hollow display before him, a stern look on his face. He knew very well that he was gambling his military and political future on this battle. He could not fail. Would not fail. The entire galaxy was watching his next move, so it would need to be a calculated one. He connected to an open radio frequency which the Orc fleet would be tuned into and then spoke in an authoritative tone. This is Grand Admiral Azeroth of the United Federation of Planets. You are currently in Federation space. I order you to return to your territory or face retaliation. Renier responded in only a few moments on the same channel. This is the Great Warlord Renier, Lord of the Chorus, Oiras and Quatira's systems, Viceroy of the Orc Empire. I have been looking forward to meeting you, Admiral Azeroth, from the moment of your infamous lie concerning our people and our glorious armies. We are here to bring you to justice for your slander, your despicable lies which have brought our two peoples to the brink of war. I call upon you now, admirals of the Federation. Deliver the criminal Azeroth so that he might face trial and judgment, and we will leave this system immediately. Refuse, and you will die here. The Federation admirals certainly didn't like Azeroth. But they had no reason to doubt the Grand Admiral had spoken the truth about Tayo. To give their commander up simply to save their lives would be mutiny, deserving of a traitor's execution. After this exchange of formalities, the two fleets faced off, silent and unmoving, for over an hour. Azeroth had his back to the wall. He'd made the order to leave the system, as was protocol, but now he had to follow up on his threat. If he didn't, the Federation would look weak. So, without any better option, Azeroth sent a message by a secure radio frequency to Chancellor Soli, announcing that he would soon begin his offensive against the hostile Orc fleet, and thus ignite the war. To counter the numerical superiority of the Orcs, Azeroth immediately arranged his corps into a careful offensive formation. 20 corps formed each of the left and right flanks, while a mere 8 corps formed the center, overseen by Grand Admiral Wesley. Azeroth himself remained at the back of the fleet, surrounded by 3 corps held in reserve. Renier saw this maneuver and ordered his subordinates to prepare for the impending battle. As the Orc fleet was so much larger than the Federation force, Renier took a balanced approach to their formation. He fielded 20.5 corps in the left, right, and center flanks, and also kept 20.5 in reserve at the back. The moment the Federation fleet moved into position, it attacked. Thousands of warship reactors flared at once, sending a spike of exhaust radiation into the surrounding space. The Orc sensor arrays caught this information and warned of an incoming attack, and soon the two fleets sped towards each other. While the people of Kronos I looked up in terror, helpless to do anything but watch. Chapter 93, 1, Battle of Kronos I. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The two fleets crashed violently together, opening fire all at once. Thousands of fighters and corvettes streamed from their battleships and darted around each other, spewing laser fire, while the larger battleships and cruisers unleashed their high-rate-of-fire plasma cannons. The first half-hour devastated the Orc Empire. Their fleet lost 15 corps and 200,000 astronauts, mostly on the side flanks, while the Federation fleet lost only 5 corps and 70.5 thousand astronauts. These losses were mostly from the central flank, creating a weak point in their formation. Azeroth reacted quickly and sent 2 of his reserve corps to strengthen the fleet center, shoring up its weakness before the enemy could take advantage of it. The Orcs fought viciously, but after an hour, it was clear that their defensive wall of a strategy was a failure. The Orc warlords had drawn their capital ships back from the front lines, creating a distance of several kilometers between them. These capital ships supported the rest of the Orc fleet with long-range weapons, but their ability to react quickly to the Federation spearhead was limited. Beove with so many troops available, the Orcs had intended to sacrifice their weaker ships to protect their larger, more important ones. They succeeded at this goal, but were completely unprepared for how happily the Federation would take advantage of this sacrifice and slaughter their corps, which were poorly supported by capital ships. Since there were relatively few Federation ships, the Orc warlords had intended to hold on until the Federation ammunition reserves were depleted. However, they had grossly underestimated how efficient the well-trained Federation astronauts were with their weapons. All in all, the Orc strategy just wasn't working. On his side, Grand Admiral Wesley, who had the exclusive command of the central flank, did his best to survive. The Orcs were hammering his flank much harder than the side flanks, which he had known would be the case due to his familiarity with Orc military doctrine. After all, as he had pointed out to that arrogant Azeroth, Wesley did have many years of experience as a Grand Admiral. Now he was hard-pressed to use all that experience to survive. With what felt like an endless stream of Orc warships attacking the weaker central flank, time was against Wesley and his corps. However, at about an hour into the battle, Wesley's military instincts began to tingle. "Something's happening," he barked at a subordinate officer. "Renier's changing his formation. Prepare to react." Indeed, Great Warlord Renier was quickly forming a new strategy. He'd hoped that Azeroth, who was known to have little experience commanding a fleet of this size, would fail to notice that his central flank was crumbling, and once it collapsed, then the Orc fleet would penetrate the Federation backlands through its broken defenses, wiping out the enemy command in a short and brutal burst. But when Azeroth almost immediately shored up his central flank with reserves, Renier had to shift to one of his fallback contingencies. Then a shudder of motion on the holo display caught Renier's eye, and he realized even before his officer reported it that the Federation had just gained an advantage on the right flank. Renier had to react now. Fortunately, he still had his 20.5 reserve corps ready to surge into battle. It was a good thing, too. He'd been unaware, at the start, of the quality of astronauts which the Federation had sent into this battle. Some of his intelligence sources had claimed the humans were acting honestly and sending their finest pilots and crews to the front lines, while other sources suggested the humans had sent a dummy fleet to distract the Orcs while they prepared an ambush of elite fighters to attack the Orcs' fleet while they weren't looking. It seemed that the Federation had sent their renowned fighters to the combat after all. It was apparent that the average Federation ship and astronaut was much better than the equivalent which Renier had fielded. To win, Renier would need to act swiftly. He ordered the right and left flanks to hold their positions until death, then sent 15 reserve corps to the central flank. He was calling Azeroth's bluff, sending 30.9 Orc corps to obliterate the mere 8 who guarded the Federation's center column. Grand Admiral Wesley saw this maneuver and gritted his teeth. He sent Azeroth a video message. "Commander, situation critical. The Orcs will overwhelm us in under an hour. The central flank will collapse without support. I await your orders." Azeroth understood the danger. Even if he had broken the Orcs' left and right flanks, the central flank was far more important. Federation victory was far from assured. Thankfully, Azeroth still had a trump card. He sent a message back to Wesley. "You must hold on no matter what. Do you understand? If your flank fails, you will activate our secret weapon. Is that understood, Grand Admiral?" Wesley, upon receiving his reply, could not believe his ears. Hatred burned in his heart towards Azeroth. But he had no choice. He served the Federation, and Grand Admiral Azeroth was his commander at this time. Wesley would put duty before his own life. "Yes, Commander," he said stiffly, not allowing even a trace of his anger to show, then sent the message. If Wesley died soon and this transmission was the last anyone ever saw of him, they would see only a complete professional, a man who had served his nation honorably till his last breath, even though his commander had abandoned him. Another 30 minutes passed. As Grand Admiral Wesley had predicted, his last corps eventually disintegrated as Orc forces blew apart almost all its remaining ships. Azeroth ordered everyone to withdraw. Except Grand Admiral Wesley. The Half-Orc's capital ship charged at full speed towards the bulk of the Orc force. Great Warlord Renier realized something was wrong immediately. "Every gun, fire upon that capital ship," he roared, staring intently at the hollow screen before him. "Fire, damn you!" But Wesley had diverted all systems to engines and forward shields, disabling even life support and climate control to ensure his ship would penetrate deep into the Orcish frontline. By the time his ship, pushing doggedly through a maelstrom of laser and plasma, slammed into the Orcish center flank, Grand Admiral Wesley and his loyal crew had already died of heatstroke. An enormous ball of blinding light covered the battlefield, swelling and rumbling as incredible quantities of atmospheric gases were blasted away at supersonic speeds, until the ball of light encompassed the entire Orc fleet. Chapter 94, 2, Battle of Kronos I. You are listening at novelfull.audio. In a split second, the dark sky of Kronos I ignited in blinding white. The Goi family following the confrontation on a hill outside their village was momentarily blinded, then a shock wave deafened them, destroying their ears and hurling them several meters. The children screamed in pain, but their parents couldn't hear their cries, helpless to do a single thing in the face of such destruction. The explosion's shock wave hit a third of the planet's surface, affecting it far worse in some places than the deafened villagers. Several cities directly beneath the explosion were leveled, and many geoils even further away suffered severe burns. A wave of panic spread across the planet as Kronos' Eye's inhabitants imagined more and more weapons of this caliber exploding in their planet's atmosphere. Kronos' Eye planetary atmosphere. Despite the Federation's attempts to flee the explosion, some of their closest ships were damaged or destroyed, though they'd managed to flee thousands of kilometers from the center of the blast. This bomb was one of the Federation's most secret weapons, a prototype 1 megaton antimatter bomb. The Federation had never been overly intimidated by the immense military and economic superiority of the Orc Empire, in large part because of this bomb's existence. The Federation knew that the Orcs were inferior in terms of military technology, and so this was a weapon the Federation could use against them without fear of retaliation in kind. In his flagship, Grand Admiral Azeroth turned to his second-in-command. Announce the Federation's victory. No, wait. Announce my victory. His subordinate didn't react to this egomaniacal abuse of power, but only nodded to signal acknowledgement. But as Azeroth savored his victory, a detection officer shouted, "Enemy signal spotted." There were survivors. Azeroth didn't let his shock show on his face. Survivors. Deserters, more likely. Clarify at once. The officer's answer came slowly. No. They're much too numerous. Hold on, collating telemetry from just before the explosion. The enemy flagship and the remaining ships never approached the front lines, Commander. There really are survivors in the Orc fleet. Azeroth marched to the control station and stared at the holo display. The officer's data was correct. The Orc fleet had suffered huge losses, but the bomb was supposed to wipe them out completely. It seemed that Renier had been so cowardly that he'd hung back very far from his fleet, and had 10 core with him. 1,000 Orc ships, still ready for battle. Azeroth immediately ordered all the remaining Federation ships to return to battle formations, but the Orcs wasted no time. Rather than retreat, they immediately swooped into a spearheaded attack formation and surged across open space towards the 30.4 remaining Federation corps. Terra citizens filled the streets in celebration. They waved the flag of the Federation, a blue field with a geometric eagle and stars upon it. Everyone chanted Azeroth's name, hailing their hero who had just dealt a crippling blow to the savage Orcs and, probably, stopped the war. In everyone's minds, Azeroth was a true hero of the people. In the presidential palace, far above the celebrating civilians, 2 men watched a huge holographic screen on the far wall. These 2 were Chancellor Soli and General Ralphit, of course. Our next fight, muttered Ralphit, will be against Grand Admiral Azeroth himself. This new popularity will be extremely dangerous for us, and for the Federation as a whole. I propose that we set up a mission to eliminate Azeroth immediately upon his return. Also, we should arrest all known human supremacists. They can't be allowed to overthrow the rule of law. Chancellor Soli replied, no. If Azeroth and the supremacists try to overthrow the government, they will be tried for their crimes. However, I don't want to start a civil war. That will happen if we commence such an operation, Ralphit. For now, please realize that Azeroth and the supremacists will be unprepared for the difficulty which the political spotlight will bring them. Politics crushes the soul and breaks down idealism, even that of the supremacists. But before Ralphit could reply, the holo feed suddenly erupted into action once more as the surviving Orcs attacked the Federation fleet. Azeroth was clever and cunning. The Orcs had begun a suicide mission, but he wouldn't be arrogant and simply throw all his ships at the enemy. Instead, he sent 15 corps to fight the Orcs, leaving 19 in reserve. If Renier had any tricks up his sleeve, this would allow Azeroth the opportunity to counter Renier's plan. The 2 fleets made contact, ships flying around one another and returning to a very standard battle. The orcs, no longer able to make use of their usual strategies involving overwhelming numbers, seemed almost on the verge of panic. They were no longer able to have two corps flank a single enemy corps which strayed too far from its allies, but had to face more skilled opponents on equal footing. Moreover, the morale of the orcs was clearly broken. It was devastating to the psyche of any pilot to see almost all your allies wiped from existence in a single instant, let alone to wonder whether what other similarly powerful weapons your enemy might be wielding. These disadvantages proved too much for the orcs to handle, and it seemed as though the Federation ships would wipe them all out, sending them after their dead allies, until an intense beam of red light exploded in the middle of the battlefield before collapsing again. A dark gray humanoid, several hundreds of meters long and wielding a huge sword of red crystal, floated in outer space. His weapon pulsed in the light of the system star, as though made of living blood. A red halo formed behind his head, giving the illusion of a bloody solar eclipse. The giant creature was none other than Renier. Chapter 95, 3, Battle of Kronos I. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Azeroth stared with bloodshot eyes at the scene before him. A Titan, he growled with hatred. A Titan was a rank A ascensionist who, approaching the point of ascension to divinity, already possessed some divine power. Such a being was an incredible weapon during a space battle and a mighty asset for an entire nation. Despite this, many nations avoided deploying them on the battlefield for fear of losing such an asset because of unforeseen circumstances, so they usually served as elite bodyguards for the leaders of these nations. Azeroth hesitated. It would be impossible to kill Renier with only the 15 corps he had initially deployed. If Azeroth had any chance of victory remaining, he'd need to throw everything he had at the enemy. Yet Azeroth knew the reputation of Titans and their divine power. The most rational part of himself knew that he stood little chance of winning even if he used every resource at his disposal. But if he retreated now, he risked losing everything. His victory would turn to humiliating defeat, and he'd lose all prestige and honor. No, it was impossible to run away at this point. So Azeroth ordered all 30.4 corps he had left to attack at once. The fighters and corvettes unleashed their laser cannons at the Titan while the battleships bombarded it with their high-velocity plasma cannons. In response, the Titan raised his immense sword, swinging it in an arc that seemed impossibly slow because of the scale of the fight. Yet, many ships couldn't evade, and the Titan crushed hundreds of them as though they were flies. But the Federation forces were far too numerous for the Titan to evade completely. Despite his enormous power, Renier grimaced in pain as laser and plasma bolts slammed repeatedly into him, injuring the Titan. Seeing this, Azeroth ordered the fleet to deploy all their remaining nuclear warheads. Thousands of nuclear armaments hit the Titan. In space, the lack of gases meant that there was no shock wave of explosions as there would have been on a planet, but the Titan's flesh still turned to plasma upon impact, causing such horrific wounds from these attacks that Renier collapsed in place. Within moments, the last orc ships were incapacitated, and then it seemed the battle was over. Azeroth smiled confidently. All units, focus your fire until the Titan is reduced to ashes. But just as the Federation troops were about to obey this order, something peculiar happened. Red energy surged from Renier's body, an X-shaped mark appeared on his forehead, and a storm of the same crimson energy swept across the battlefield, destroying hundreds of vessels. Azeroth's ship rocked as this pulse of energy disrupted its stabilizing systems, and an officer quickly shouted that their reactor was damaged. This gave Kronos I's gravitational field the chance to pull them downwards, and so the ship plummeted towards the planet. The remaining Federation admirals quickly reacted, ordering the remaining troops to retreat. Throughout the Federation, joy was replaced by bitterness and fear. A major battle had been lost, 2 Grand Admirals and dozens of other admirals had died, and above all, the people of the Federation had just learned that their enemy controlled a Titan. Certainly, it was a Pyrrhic victory for the Orc Empire, but that didn't make things any better for the Federation. Beyond even the tremendous loss of military might, the psychological shock was devastating. Apophis was watching the battle with Antaria, staring intently at every detail of the unfolding events. The advent of the Eternals begins today, he muttered. Chapter 96. The third way. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Most players in any MMORPG didn't care about their game's lore. Of course, there were always players who did appreciate this element, but they were in the minority. One of the unique aspects of Horus was the way its players were so eager to follow and assimilate the game's lore in order to progress. Of course, given the current situation with all the Federation NPCs rapturously watching the Battle of Kronos I, there weren't many quests to do. Players and NPCs sat side by side across the Federation, watching the lifelike holograms depicting the battle. It was so cool. The scene of thousands of ships clashing over a planet of billions of people was so majestic that even those who weren't fans of science fiction or space opera were still entranced. Such were the possibilities waiting in the Horus universe. For many players, this was the first time they realized that their imaginations were the only limit to what was possible in this game. Once it became clear that the Federation had lost to the Titan Renier, the forums resounded with numerous shocked conversations. Many of these players had felt intimidated by Azeroth, being too scared to challenge the Federation, but what were they to do now? The Federation had seemed to be the most powerful force around, but they just lost to the Orcs. Some players wished to leave Federation space altogether, but how were they supposed to get an acceptable passport? On Kronos I, the space battle looked as though it would soon give way to a land battle. Over 10 million Federation soldiers had fortified the planet in its major urban centers, and many Geoils had been conscripted into the ranks in addition to these. It took some time for the land battle to begin, due to the forces in space still needing to exit hyperspace before they could land on the planet itself. This gave a good amount of time for the Federation to organize their defenses on Kronos I, but would it be enough? At the same moment, all players received the same alert. Notification. Call to defend Kronos I. Summary. The Federation has lost the Battle of Kronos I, and the planet itself will soon be invaded by the Orc Empire. The Federation is calling all to volunteer and defend freedom. Join the nearest recruiting station to take part. Basic reward. Become a full citizen of the Federation plus basic Federation military equipment plus 100 GC for each Orc soldier killed. Success reward. Your genocidal trait will be replaced with the rehabilitated trait plus individual bonus rewards according to individual combat results. A moment later, another message appeared. Notification. Liberation of Kronos I. Summary. The Orc Empire has won the Battle of Kronos I, and will soon fight to free the planet from Federation rule. The Orc Empire is offering all volunteers the opportunity to join its ranks. Go to any Orc Empire system and find a war office to join. Basic reward. Become a citizen of the Orc Empire plus basic Orc military equipment plus possibility of earning land on Kronos I. Success reward. Gain the passive ability, Fighter, plus individual bonus rewards according to individual combat results. The forums lit up with excitement as everyone debated which side to choose. It was obvious that victory would be decided by the intervention of players, so there was a lot of debate whether everyone should simply choose the same side. Of course, some players simply trolled the others with their suggestions, but other players actually had latched onto an interesting and original idea. Why fight for someone else when the Eternals now numbered about 500 million? They could easily take over the Kronos system for themselves, let alone Kronos I. There was the problem of most players being poor and not owning ships, of course. However, it was also obvious that the Federation, and the Orcs, to some degree, had lost a huge percentage of their ships. That is, the Eternals were now far more powerful than they once were, and both sides demanding their help were much weaker than they had been only a day before. Almost half of all players were rank D, which made them far more powerful than any Orc or Federation soldier. And, of course, nearly 10% of players were rank C, which was of an even greater level of power over most soldiers. And, of course, most soldiers in the battle would be unaccustomed to fighting on land, as most combat happened in space. They would still be skilled warriors, certainly, but their specialty would surely not be on the ground. This strategy quickly became popular, and more players began to plan an invasion of Kronos I. Chapter 97 Change. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Paris, several hours after the Battle of Kronos I. A press conference was taking place in Paris, one that would go down in history. 3 MMO superstars were on screen. Akiko Hiroki, aka Mario, from the Super Guild Toxic. Enzo Romano, aka Caesar, from the Super Guild Renovatio Imperii. William Woke, aka Lucifer, from the Super Guild Lord of War. These 3 had come together to announce a historic alliance between their guilds, an alliance with the goal of capturing the Kronos system. Not for Federation, nor the Orc Empire, nor for any NPC faction. No, these 3 called for all players to join the Great Coalition and help create a nation-state for the Eternals themselves. This press conference drew a record audience of 1 billion viewers, an announcement of such magnitude that some in the media speculated that this was as meaningful an event as the announcement of war between 2 real-world countries. It was truly an astounding thing that 3 super guilds had joined forces, let alone that many lesser guilds agreed to support them. After many years of the corporations which ran these super guilds in different MMORPGs warring against and subverting one another, nobody expected them to unite like this. Together, it was estimated that the Great Coalition already had over 1 million players, as well as dozens of ships. Beyond that, millions more players, both solo and in various smaller guilds, were predicted to join in the coalition's goal. The news of the Battle of Kronos I and the players' responses to it filled the news. People talked about it night and day, with many in the media claiming one side or another should be supported. Choosing a side became as culturally important as choosing a political party, which boosted Horus's popularity even further. It had already been the most played MMORPG of all time, but it seemed there was really no ceiling on its hype. Even those who didn't play video games started to become seriously interested in it. In the game, Apophis was so bombarded with messages that he decided to just ignore them all. Since he was considered the strongest player in Horus, his decision to choose a side would be considered one of the most important events in MMORPG history. In response to all the events following the Battle of Kronos I, Apophis held a guild meeting, the first since Eclipse's creation, in his suite at the Royal Palace of Terra Hotel. Everyone was there, including Laurent, under the nickname of Jack Ripper. Though he was still only LVL1, Apophis had lent him some money to pay for his trip from Era and to help him start playing. Apophis took the floor and began the meeting. Thank you all for coming so quickly. We have 2 topics to discuss. The first is the future of Eclipse. As you can see, since its creation, the guild really hasn't developed at all. We haven't recruited anyone except Jack Ripper, and he just barely joined today. Except for the guild chest, which contains an even 3,560,000 GC, thanks to my taxes as planetary governor of Era, we haven't invested anything into the greater functioning of the guild. This is my fault, due to how busy I've been lately. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to become less busy anytime soon. Therefore, I recommend Lotus to take my place as guild leader. She'll devote all her time to developing the guild, but I'll remain the external image and will still serve as a director. What do you all think? Lotus was astonished. Although Apophis had spoken about this a few times, to see it come true was incredible. Especially since the guild had quite a lot of funds just waiting to be invested into guild development. Hulk answered in a sarcastic tone. As much as I love small guilds, the more the game grows, the more manpower we'll need for our ambitions. Look at what the super guilds are doing on Kronos I. Together, we're the strongest team in the game, but just imagine if you were able to share your secrets with an army of our own. Eclipse could really have its own army and solar system one day. White, in a teasing mood, said enthusiastically, here's to a woman in power. It can only produce good things. Only chocolate seemed reserved. I like our little guild of 5 people, actually. But I trust you, Apophis. If you think we need to develop further, I'll approve of the strategy. Jack Ripper, though new, spoke up as well. Well, I just joined you, and Alexander's my friend, so I don't exactly have an impartial opinion. But I'm definitely not going to say no to having such powerful companions as you. The more the better, right? And it would be nice to have some people on Era sharing their EXP with us. Apophis nodded decisively. Well, then, it's decided. Apophis selected the guild menu. Notification. The player, Lotus, has been promoted to leader of your guild, Eclipse. Lotus's first action was to create a special member rank which she named Supreme Leader, with the same privileges as the leader. Then she added Apophis to this. She also created the rank of Founder, with advanced privileges, and appointed the other 4 guild members to it. White gave a light-hearted laugh. The new guild leaders already done more in 1 minute than you did in 3.5 months, Supreme Leader. Apophis took the joke with a smile. After all, he'd never been strong in management skills, as they'd never interested him. He wanted to keep both his freedom and his power of decision in the guild, so this was a decision that made sense. He would keep his directorial power, but wouldn't be forced to manage every detail of Eclipse. This was what the super guilds themselves did. The star players didn't have time to be administrators, for their growth in the game itself was what made people admire them. Though they had authority, they were more icons of their guilds than actual leaders. Apophis spoke again. Now, let's talk about the situation at hand. Which side will we choose in the war? Chapter 98 Illogical Choice. You are listening at novelfull.audio. We will support the Federation. Everyone was surprised by Apophis' answer. Beyond simply the idea of joining the side of the losers of a major battle, there was another issue in everyone's minds. Though they hadn't raised the issue yet, everyone else wanted to join the camp of the Eternals to found a state belonging to the players, because the players deeply hated the Federation since the defeat of Era. Since that day, it had been a common goal of the players to free themselves from this status of subjugated people by force. But despite this surprising outcome, everyone accepted Apophis' decision. Lotus said, "It's your decision, Apophis. I trust you. After all, it's thanks to you that we are where we are today. With the money our guild has, I think we can buy 4 corvettes from the Federation and recruit 50 guild members as pilots. Aside from this, I think it's a good idea to recruit slowly and carefully to ensure our new members will be of utmost quality, at least until we have a solid guild hierarchy in place. After that, we can recruit intensively, like the big guilds do. Considering the time to buy and recruit, we should be ready to leave in 2 days." Apophis nodded. "Well then, we leave in 40.8 hours. Prepare the provisions, potions, weapons, and ammunition. Once we're on Kronos I, the situation will be very uncertain. We won't have much opportunity to buy more provisions. However, we can use the occasion to test our new recruits. On the topic of corvettes and crew, I propose that each one of you orders one for yourself to command." Everyone gratefully accepted, eager to own a ship and be a commander. After that, the rest of the meeting dealt with minor matters, such as the class composition of new recruits. After the meeting, Apophis contacted General Ralphit and requested a meeting. Apophis had noticed something strange about the quest Grand Admiral Azeroth had previously given him. Normally, when a quest giver died, the quest automatically cancelled. However, the massive recruitment quest which Azeroth had given him remained active. In fact, its recruitment counter was steadily rising. This meant Azeroth must have survived. It was the worst situation possible for the Federation, because Azeroth was now a martyr. He'd been posthumously decorated with the Star of the Federation, the highest distinction the nation could award, because Chancellor Soli had wanted to make his once-dead opponent a symbol for the people. If Azeroth came back now, nothing could stop his rise to power. General Ralphit agreed to meet Apophis, inviting him to the Secret Service building where he'd previously been imprisoned. Apophis traveled there alone. He didn't miss the place at all. Ralphit waited for him in the entrance hall, then led him into a soundproof meeting room. "Well, Apophis, what is the emergency?" Apophis answered, "Given my rank as a lieutenant, colonel of the Federation Army, as well as my title as Commander of the Eternals, I wish to take command of all my people's volunteers on the battlefield of Kronos within 2 days." Ralphit smiled grimly. "You think we're going to let a lieutenant colonel command several million ascensionists? Besides, you have very close ties to the human supremacists. Your usefulness since Azeroth's death has disappeared, Apophis. Then, of course, your demonic appearance repulses me. Every cell in my body is disgusted by your presence. You will get no favors from me, Lieutenant Colonel. If it were up to me, you would be in jail right now." Apophis clenched his fists. His purple eyes turned neon red and 2 of his Susanoo's hands manifested around him. Ralphit suddenly recalled Apophis' power. Apophis gave a wide smile and continued. "I have recruited almost all of the 10 million Eternals Azeroth requested of me. Considering recent events, my people will make up a large percentage of the Kronos battlefield. Either I join your side as a commander, or I join the Orc Empire. You can decide which you'd prefer. Moreover, be aware that the assassination mission that you gave me is unfinished. Azeroth is alive. I have it from a reliable source." Ralphit really hated Apophis. The demonic-looking monstrosity was a disgusting opportunist who cared nothing about the fate of the Federation. All Apophis wanted was more power for himself, even if it meant hurting his own side. Ralphit doubted Azeroth had survived. Surely this was a lie to make Ralphit think Apophis was still useful. On the other hand, the Federation couldn't afford to lose so many ascensionists to the enemy. So, Ralphit answered, "I'll talk to the Chancellor about it, but expect some conditions." Apophis accepted, and the 2 men left. Now it was time for Apophis to do as he'd instructed his teammates and prepare for war. Fortunately, he was very rich. He could buy anything he wanted in terms of war supplies, including weapons and ammunition. Considering he was on Terra, one of the most populated planets in the galaxy, everything imaginable could be had for the right price. After purchasing a huge order of consumables, Apophis traveled to a particular building, the Temple of the Goddess Valor. She was a benevolent goddess who had granted the intelligent beings of the galaxy their use of cosmic energy. She was renowned for loving peace, even though many of her recipients had used their comic powers for war. But Apophis wasn't traveling here for purely religious reasons. This temple was special because it also served as a military training center for Federation ascensionists. Chapter 99 Valor Temple. You are listening at novelfull.audio. The ascensionists in the Federation were few in number compared to this population. About 1% of the citizens of the Federation were of Tier D or higher. Obviously the military authorities did everything to recruit them and integrate them into the army. After all, it was a real strategic asset to have them. As a rule, they served as military commissioners within the army forces in order to inspire the troops and in case of need to liquidate possible deserters, so they were called super soldiers. Within the armed forces, Apophis was here because he would have without doubt books of competence for this class. Besides, it saw quite a lot of players in the temple. It was one of the zone of meeting favored for the players on Terra. But unlike the vast majority of players, Apophis was a senior officer in the Federal Army. So he had more skills than any other player. Apophis went to the building's archivist and asked him for an account of the skill books for sale that he had available for the Espers. There were more than 2,700 skill books available for Espers alone. This was obviously way too many. Anyone would have taken several hours before even getting interested in a particular book. But fortunately Apophis had the experience of his old life. If not, he would have spent several weeks before finding a skill that he liked. So he spoke to the archivist and said, "I wish to buy the Book of the Dead." The archivist was quite surprised. Usually the buyer would take tens of minutes or even hours before buying, but in just a few seconds he had made his decision. The archivist looked at him and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Lieutenant Colonel, but this book is a unique edition." Apophis replied, "So it is not on sale at the moment?" The archivist replied, "Yes, but it is considered a collector's item, and with the processing fees and my management fees, it will probably cost a lot of money." Apophis replied, "How much?" The archivist replied, 780,000 GC. It was a total rip-off. It was the price of a Corvette spaceship. But Apophis really needed the skill of this book before the battle on Kronos I started, so he tried something. He answered in Zetark. "One empire, one people, one destiny." The archivist was extremely surprised. It was one of the rallying codes of the supremacists. He answered in Zetark. "Glory to the empire." Then in common language. "Well, comrade. I'm sorry I tried to rip you off. I took you for a cosmopolitan dog. I can offer you 215,000 GC for this collection book. I can't sell it to you any lower, sorry that it's a book that hasn't been reproduced since the last war." Apophis accepted and took the book. Book of Death, Espert, Rare. Summary. Allows you to learn the skill, Return of the Dead. Effect. Allows to resuscitate instaniment a player or NPC Ascensionist for 100 energy. Upgrade available for 50 points of talent. It was time for him to leave the temple. He can only buy one book a month. He then went to the military airfield of Terra. Chapter 100 High Galactic Council. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Millions of light-year from Terra, in the galactic center, planet Auralia, Auralia Prime System, ruined capital of the Zetark Empire. A giant space station loomed near planet Auralia, nearly as big as a dwarf planet. It was the seat of the High Galactic Council, where all the species of the galaxy met to discuss interstellar politics and to try to resolve conflicts between members. On rare occasions, they even addressed conflicts outside their community. To be part of the High Council, a nation needed to be completely independent. It needed to be neither a colony, a protectorate, nor a vassal state. In addition, the country had to reach the third stage of technological advancement, that is to say, the highest technological level among living galactic nations. The High Council was directed by 5 patriarchs, each of whom was selected by one of the 5 major space nations, the Orc Empire, the Holy Elf Empire, Republic of the Two Suns, the Neo-Zetark Empire, and the Theocracy of the Void. At this particular moment, the Elf Patriarch of the High Galactic Council said, "Today the High Council is dealing with the case of the conflict between the Federation and the Orc Empire. Chancellor Soli of the United Federation of Planets, you will speak first," then the Orc Emperor Xerxer 16. So it was Chancellor Soli, the accuser, who stepped forward to the huge lectern where all the leaders of the galaxy were watching him. It was extraordinary pressure, even for Soli, an experienced politician. After swallowing the ball of fear in his throat, he spoke. "Dear leaders of the galaxy, I have summoned you here because a daring crime was committed on the planet Era, a protectorate of our nation. The great warlord Renier genocided the population. He then attacked the Chronos system, which belongs to the Federation. The rules of the galactic community are clear. Conflicts between civilized nations must be resolved through diplomacy. However, the Orc Empire has never respected this rule. Certainly, before now, they have invaded civilizations that were not part of the High Council. Now their limitless ambition has reached a new level. They have attacked a member of the High Council itself. The Council's response must be unanimous, one of strong action against the Orc Empire." As his speech drew to a close, a huge holographic screen lit up behind him. It showed the alleged events of Era, shocking the entire room. Images flashed by of thousands of Tiadings dead in the ruined planetary capital of Taio, as well as images of summary executions performed by Orc soldiers. Finally, the Council witnessed what appeared to be an orbital nuclear bombardment by the Orc fleet. Of course, most of these images had been carefully doctored by the Federation's Secret Service, led by General Ralphot, in order to influence the High Galactic Council. To anyone who wasn't a computer expert, the images seemed like real life. Eddie E.T. Emperor Xerxer 16 then took the stage to respond to these accusations. However, he was clearly shaken. The Emperor denied any involvement of his empire in the extermination of the Tithing people, but even he wasn't entirely sure. The Orc Empire was a tribally based decentralized state, so it could well be that what the Federation claimed was true. In order to preserve the diplomatic reputation of the empire, Xerxer promised to conduct an internal investigation. To most of those listening, this was an informal admission by the emperor. However, no one wanted to speak up and directly challenge the Orc Empire. Despite only gaining a narrow victory over the Federation, the Orc Empire had once again demonstrated its power at the Battle of Kronos I. Without the Federation's secret weapon, an Orc victory would have been certain. And, of course, the fleet of the great warlord Renier was only a small part of the huge Orc army. It was the largest army of the 920.7 interstellar nations of the Galactic High Council. Nevertheless, the impact of the Battle of Kronos I had once again put the spotlight on the Orc Empire, and the other great space nations were certainly not going to let the Orc Empire become a galactic superpower. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time.